Good evening and welcome back to LiveLaw Academy. I hope all of you are doing great. So today's topic is part performance under Transfer of Property Act. The idea of Transfer of Property Act is to promote more and more transfers. And this also has been one of the questions that has been previously asked as to law promotes alienation of property and not accumulation. Okay. So this is very much related to the discussion that we are doing now in today's class. A part of it maybe wherein we see that Transfer of Property Act aims into promoting more and more transfer by way of it can be by way of a gift, it can be by way of a lease, sale. All these are different ways by which we alienate our property. Okay, it which can be for the interest in the property or the transfer of property itself, right? So one such part or one such doctrine under Transfer of Property Act protects the rights of both transferor and transferee. Even though this is per se for transferee, we realize and we recognize that both the parties have to have equity, both the parties have to have need to promote equity, and therefore their conduct will be seen here under section 53A of the Transfer of Property Act. Okay, so let's go to the provision. Let's read the provision to understand what all are the different ingredients. Then I will show you a recent case from 2025 2024 wherein the Supreme Court has reiterated all these points again, specifically focusing on section 53A and the requirements of it. In addition to that, you also need to know that 53A, so that gives you an idea that this was introduced or this was added by way of amendment, right? So 2009 amendment is very important for the law, that is TPA 1882, right? So do, whenever you are reading Transfer of Property Act for your preliminary examination purpose, see where all the amendments have been made in 2009. Okay, that is the first thing. Second, when you're reading a provision per se, try to find out the ingredients or the essentials of that particular section or the provision. So let's start and let's see what all is required for section 53A to understand doctrine of part performance. Okay, so as the name suggests, this is what I tell my students always, that first and foremost you try to link the name to the idea. Okay, the simplest thing that you can think of. So because we are talking about Transfer of Property Act, and here performance will be what, to make the transfer, right? How does the transfer happen? So very specifically, this is a law which regulates the inter vivos transfer. So what did I say? Inter vivos. I'll write it for you. Inter vivos means the transfer between living person. Okay. So here, if let's say I want to make transfer by way of a sale or a sale deed from me to you, we are both living person. This is not by operation of law, and the transfer will take place, right? So what will be part performance here? So let's understand this by way of an example. Let's say X is interested in selling off the property to Y, okay? And the amount of property or the amount of consideration for this transaction is rupees 10 crores. Now, in this case, X is selling the property, so Y has in consideration maybe given 1 crore of rupees, okay? And he is willing to, so he must be willing to give the rest of the money, and there is already a contract between them which is in writing. Now, if you refer to Transfer of Property Act, the mandate is that it has to be in writing as per section 53A. But when we read this with Indian Registration Act, there have been further amendments wherein we understand that it also has to be registered. So the contract that we are specifically talking of under section 53A has to be in writing and has to be registered, okay, as per the Registration Act, Indian Registration Act, section 17, which I'll show you. All right. In addition to this, now the parties are interested, both the parties have shown inclination, that's how they have a contract also in place. What happens here is that there comes a third person in picture. Okay, Z comes in picture and Z offers to X that this house, I am interested in buying it for rupees 12 crores. And therefore, X realizes that I still have time. I have not actually completed the entire sale deed, which has a lot of formal requisites, right? I have not done that. And therefore, what I can do is that I will transfer this property to Z for 12 crores. Okay. This is what X does in this situation. What will be the remedy available to Y in this case? Is Y at fault in any manner? I have just told you that Y has uh, paid the amount whatever was asked, okay, which is in the contract. He is willing to pay the leftover amount as well, and therefore in this situation, why is he getting punished for the for the better offer that X got into picture? So this is how this doctrine of part performance is going to be protective of this person's right. This X is the transferor, Y is the transferee, and this law will be specifically protecting the right of the transferee. Okay, now let's try to understand how. So let's read section 53A, which says when any person contracts to transfer for consideration. So even though gift is part of Transfer of Property Act, it is not something which will be protected under section 53. Okay, so the transfer must be for consideration for any immovable property. All right. So the other essential is that it has to be for an immovable property. There is an entire discussion as to what falls into the category of immovable property, but you can definitely start with reading the definition from Transfer of Property Act, section 3. Okay, by writing signed by him. So the essential as per Transfer of Property Act is that it has to be in writing and it has to be signed by him or on his behalf, from which the terms necessary to constitute the transfer can be ascertained. So it is important. And why this has been mentioned? Because this shows certainty in the intention of the parties, right? So the terms can be ascertained. We can understand that the parties intended to make that particular transfer, okay, with reasonable certainty, and the transferee has. Now the equity comes into picture, okay? If you see, this is Transfer of Property Act 1882, wherein we did acknowledge equity. We had started acknowledging it, even though this has been introduced later by way of amendment. Equity still prevails, right? And therefore, this is based on the concept of equity, wherein we say that the transferee has done his part, okay? The transferee in part performance of the contract has taken possession of the property or any part thereof. Okay. Now, either the transferee has taken possession or the transferee was already in possession. Now he continues in possession or in part performance of the contract. So it's very clear that either the transferee has taken possession, which also signifies and which also again shows the intention of both the transfer and transferee to actually make the transfer possible. Okay. In addition to this, if there is a possibility that he was already in possession, he was enjoying the property as a tenant, and now he's interested in buying the property. So even though if he was already in possession, this also gets protected, and he will again have the protection of 53A. And has, so there is an and between this. Okay, so you need to have possession, and with that you have done some act in furtherance. Okay, so this act in furtherance is now going to materialize, is going to give clarity as to what has been your intention with regards to the transfer of the property. Okay, acts in furtherance of the contract, and the transferee has performed or is willing. As I was telling you, either he has made the payment, the entire payment, or he is willing to perform his part of the contract. So here the idea is part performance. You have partly done the performance of the contract. The other person was intending, the other person was voluntarily agreeing to make the transfer, and despite of all of this, now there is no transfer that has been done. So this transferee, this Y that we have in picture here, what all remedies will he have? So if you refer to specific relief act, we understand that X can be injuncted from transferring the property to Z. So injunction is available. X can be asked to specifically perform the contract. So we have specific performance of the contract also available. So these are remedies which are mentioned under specific relief act, right? Or if Y was in possession of the property, now that X is trying to dispossess, has dispossessed, so we have remedy under section 6 of the specific relief act as well. So these are remedies that are available in the other law. And therefore, and in addition to that, we have the remedy under Transfer of Property Act as well, which very clearly says that in such a situation, the court will do what? The court can ask the person to deliver the property. And if there is any other person like Z, if there is any other third party, his interest will not be above the interest of the transferee. Okay. So then, notwithstanding that there is an instrument of transfer, the transfer has not been completed in the manner prescribed, therefore, by the law in time being enforced, the transferor or any person claiming under him shall be debarred from enforcing against the transferee. So the first essential is that if in that situation any requirement as per the law being in force, right? So the law, for example, when we talk about a sale, okay, because we were discussing sale here, the requisite of a sale deed as per Transfer of Property Act, also it has to be in writing, it has to have two witnesses, attestation has to be done. So all of this has not been done. Therefore, even though it has not been completed in the manner prescribed, the transferor still will be debarred from enforcing the rights against the transferee. So this way, we protect the right of the transferee even though the absolute transfer has not been done in a situation. But there is an exception to that, and which is mentioned under the proviso of Section 53A, which specifically says that this transferee's right will, even though his right is above the right of the transferor, right? But his right will not be above the right of another transferee who has paid consideration and who had no notice about this transaction. Okay, so the proviso says, let's read it now. Nothing in this section shall affect the right of a transferee for consideration without notice of contract or part performance thereof. So this is basically talking about a bona fide transferee. A bona fide purchaser who has bought the property, who had no idea without, without any notice of this sort of a transaction that has existed between X and Y, his rights will be considered to be above the right of this transferee who we have tried to give protection under section 53A. Okay, so merely by reading 53A we understand that there are so many essentials. Okay, now let's try to summarize these essentials. First, it has to be a contract for transfer of immovable property. There has to be a transfer, and it has to be for immovable property. Then it must be a written contract as mentioned here. We also understand that in the Indian Registration Act, let me just take you there as well. We have Indian Registration Act and we go to section 70. Okay, and you see here very clearly mentioned that the documents containing contracts to transfer for consideration any movable property for the purpose of 53A, okay, shall be registered. So now another essential or another requirement can be added here, which is it has to be written plus it has to be registered as per Section 17 Indian Registration. Okay, that is there. It has to be a valid contract. Okay, it has to be for immovable property. There must be transfer for consideration. So transfer for consideration also gives an idea that, when we talk about gift, it will be excluded. It has to be in writing, which very clearly gives us the indication of the intention of the party. And if in any situation the contract is vague or is unclear, which does not clearly depicts the intention, then in that situation the protection of 53A will not be given. Okay, possession must be given in furtherance of the contract. It is very important that the contract that has taken place between X and Y, the possession has moved in furtherance of that only. Okay, and then there must be willingness of the transferee to perform their part. So this is equity. One who seeks equity must do equity in furtherance of the contract or the part of the contract that exists between the two of them. Okay, so these are the essentials of section 53A, which you must have to mention. You can just explain these a bit as to the discussion that we have done, and then for a 3 marker, for a 5 marker, this should be fine. Okay, now let's get into the other relevant factors. So this has been added by way of the section was added by way of the amendment in 2009. This has been done to prevent the unfair exploitation, which takes place because of lack of formal registration, and that is where we call doctrine of part performance to step in and to protect the right of the people. As I've mentioned, this is an equitable principle, so it is based on fairness. It is based on promoting the fairness between the parties. Okay. Now, yes, let's understand this with regards to. I've already told you there is one exception which falls in section 53A proviso. Now, very recently, the court in this particular case has affirmed that the protection will be granted to a person for a person possessing a property under the part performance of a contract and is not available to a party who knowingly entered into an agreement despite being aware of pending litigation. So, here basically we are talking about the proviso. If you are that third person who is aware of the lispendence or of the pending litigation between X and Y, and despite of it you purchase the property, then in that situation you lack one thing from the proviso, and that is absence of notice. There has to be absence of notice for you to get the protection under section 53A. Okay, so therefore very specifically the transfer section 53A, the protection will not be available to a person who has entered into an agreement knowing about the pending litigation. Okay, that is one thing. And we have another case. You can just write down the name of the case. I'll take you to the copy of the judgment for you to see that how very recently now also the court has been talking about and highlighting and explaining as to what all is really required for the protection of a prospective purchaser, a transferee in the situation of 53A. Okay. So let's read this. There is a contract in writing by the transferor for transfer of consideration of any movable property signed by him on his behalf. All these has been mentioned, right? The transferee in part performance of contract has taken possession of the property. Very, very relevant. If you do not have the possession, you can't really seek the protection of 53A. So again, the idea of introducing this was, we already have something that is a concept of fraudulent transfer. Maybe I'll do another video on that as well. So already the creditors and already the concept of fraudulent transfer gives protection. So therefore, this was included wherein we see that the person has taken possession or was already in possession and continues with the same. Okay, so this is specific to that and this must be there. And the transferee must have done some act in furtherance to show willingness. So willingness is something that we see is, is there when we talk about specific relief act also. And these law does give you protection only and only when, when the party who's seeking protection has also done equity, right? So yes, so this should be enough for you to write in your answer. We have discussed recent cases, right? You can mention these recent cases in your answer and you can explain each and every essential ingredients of part performance for for you to fetch good marks in your examination. So I hope this was beneficial to you. You can drop your questions in the chat box and also your recommendations if you want any other topic from Transfer of Property Act to be covered by us on YouTube. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, all of you.